Good evening. You're looking at a live view of Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where SpaceX is counting down to the launch of a Falcon 9 rocket carrying 22 second-generation Starlink satellites. Liftoff is scheduled for 11:58 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 3:58 UTC for our viewers around the world. Tonight's launch will push the limits of the Falcon 9 as this rocket's reusable first-stage booster is making its 16th flight. Previously, SpaceX had certified its fleet of boosters for up to 15 missions. I'm Stephen Young, and I'll be providing commentary from Spaceflight Now's News Bureau at the Kennedy Space Center press site. I'm joined by my colleague Adam Bernstein, who will be operating the cameras this morning. If you'd like to support our coverage of the space program, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up button to like this stream. That really helps us reach a wider audience. And if you haven't done so already, click the subscribe button so you'll get notifications. That way you won't miss any of our future streams. You can also support our work by using the Super Chat feature or by becoming a member of our YouTube channel. We can't do these broadcasts without the support of our members and viewers, and we'd like to thank everyone who's made a contribution to help fund our coverage. We're about 20 minutes away from the point in the countdown where the launch director will give a go for the start of propellant load for this morning's launch. SpaceX is running the countdown from its Launch and Landing Control Center just outside the south gate of Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. The launch team is also being supported by control rooms at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. By this point, the chief engineer should have already conducted their technical poll. Although we've had some stormy weather in the area this evening, conditions do appear favorable for this morning's launch. The last forecast we received earlier today from the 45th Weather Squadron gave a 90% chance of acceptable conditions for launch on this fourth launch opportunity of the day. The concerns this evening will be for violations of the Anvil Cloud Rules, the Surface Electric Fields Rule, and the Cumulus Cloud Rule. Those rules are all related to lightning and the potential for lightning. We're not expecting any problems with upper level winds or with the weather conditions out to sea in the booster recovery zone. Should they need it, SpaceX has 4 more backup opportunities for launch tomorrow. T-minus 50 minutes and counting. Let's take a closer look at the Falcon 9 vehicle. It stands 70 meters or 229 feet tall and has a diameter of 3.6 meters or about 12 feet. The bottom two-thirds of the rocket is the first stage. Today's first stage booster has flown 15 times before. It is making a record-breaking 16th flight on this mission. It is designated tail number 1058 in the SpaceX fleet. At the base of the rocket are the 9 Merlin engines, which burn rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen to produce 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are the black carbon fiber landing legs that will be used to land the first stage on the drone ship. Above the first stage is the interstage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core surrounded by carbon fiber. In the inset image, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it falls through the atmosphere tail first like a dart as it heads to a landing on the drone ship. At the top of the interstage are 3 mechanical latches that attach it to the second stage. At first stage main engine cutoff, high pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers will ensure there is a clean separation. The second stage nozzle is safely housed inside the interstage adapter until stage separation. The upper stage is powered by a single modified Merlin engine called the Merlin vacuum engine, or MVAC. It is equipped with a large nozzle optimized for burns in the vacuum of space and produces about 200,000 pounds of thrust. It will be fired twice on today's flight to place the 22 Starlink satellites into orbit. The MVAC engine burns the same propellant mix of kerosene and liquid oxygen as the first stage. It will ignite a third time after the deployment of the Starlink satellites. That will be a deorbit burn to drive the stage back into the atmosphere where it will burn up. That eliminates the risk of creating any unnecessary space debris on this mission. The second stage is the only part of the Falcon 9 that is not recovered for reuse. At the very top of the rocket is the payload fairing containing the 22 Starlink satellites. The payload fairing is made up of a carbon composite material and is 13 meters tall, which is about 43 feet, and 5.2 meters or 17 feet in diameter. The 2 halves of the payload fairing will be recovered a little further downrange from where the first stage will land on the drone ship. They will gently splash down under parachutes. SpaceX's recovery ship Bob will fish the fairing halves out of the water and return them to Cape Canaveral for refurbishment and reuse. The next major milestone in the countdown will be the go no go poll by the launch director for the start of the terminal count. Tonight, the launch team is based at the SpaceX Launch and Landing Control Center about 10 miles south of the pad near Port Canaveral. Inside the control center, engineers will be tracking the health of the Falcon 9 rocket, the pad facilities, and the Starlink spacecraft. They will also be receiving weather updates from the 45th Weather Squadron. This poll takes place electronically. The launch team uses a mouse click to confirm they are go for launch. Just a reminder, if you haven't done so already, please hit the thumbs up button to like our stream. We want to get as many people as possible watching this launch, and by hitting that button, it really helps us out. We should now be receiving audio from SpaceX's Launch Control Center. Hopefully we will soon hear word from the launch director that the poll has been completed.
Countdown reminder. Pole ready for propellant load and launch. Step 57.68 is open for your buy at this time.
And then we heard the launch director telling the launch team that the poll is now open. They will be reporting whether they are go or no go for launch. Fueling of the Falcon 9 will get underway in less than 5 minutes if they report back that all is ready for launch.
On countdown net, pulling is complete. We're go for propellant load and launch. Reminder on abort instructions. For non-urgent no-go conditions, brief CERLD and they'll approve aborting the countdown. For urgent issues affecting a safety operation, operator shall call hold on the countdown net. Launch control will abort the launch auto sequence immediately, proceed on a launch abort auto. T-minus 10 seconds, launch control will be hands off. Relying on automated abort criteria for the remainder of the count.
And there we have it. The launch director has heard back from the launch team, completed his poll, and the launch team is go for launch, go for the start of propellant
Tank
load.
running for propellant load.
And that call indicates that the propellant loading process preparations are getting underway. Once again, propellant load will begin at the T-minus 35-minute point. Coming up on the start of propellant load. T-minus 35 minutes and counting.
The launch auto has started.
And with that call, that's confirmation that the propellant loading operations are underway at Space Launch Complex 40. Liftoff is set for 11:58 p.m. Eastern Time. Ground computers are now managing the automatic sequence to pump propellants aboard the Falcon 9 rocket. 3 of the 4 propellant tanks on the rocket are being loaded at this point. Those are the kerosene tanks on the first and second stage and the liquid oxygen tank on the first stage. The fuel is a highly refined rocket-grade kerosene known as Rocket Propellant 1, or RP1 for short. The oxidizer used by the Falcon 9's Merlin engines is a super-chilled liquid oxygen. By densifying the oxygen, SpaceX can pack in more propellants and gain more performance than is possible with standard liquid oxygen. So let's take a look at the countdown sequence. We've already had the launch directors go for propellant load and the start of the loading of kerosene and liquid oxygen aboard the vehicle. The next major step will be at T-minus 16 minutes. It will be the turn of liquid oxygen to start flowing into the second stage. Prior to this, we'll also see the so-called big vent from the strongback at the launch pad. At T-minus 7 minutes, the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines will get underway. During this process, a small amount of liquid oxygen will be pumped through the plumbing and turbo pumps. This is designed to protect those engines from the thermal shock during the ignition sequence. About 6 minutes prior to launch, the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strongback start to retract from the vehicle. It'll recline to an angle of about 1.5 degrees, leaning back ever so slightly from the Falcon 9. It will stay there until liftoff. Then at liftoff, that strongback will fall away in a more rapid fashion to clear the path of the Falcon 9 as it rises off the pad. At about 2 minutes, liquid oxygen loading should be complete. And at this point, the Falcon 9 will be fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. Then in the final 60 seconds of the countdown, the control of the clock will be handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard computers. The propellant tanks will be brought up to flight pressure, and the SpaceX launch director will give his final go for liftoff. The engine ignition command will be issued at T-minus 3 seconds. If all 9 engines ignite and are healthy, the flight computer will give the command to release the hold down clamps and the Falcon 9 will lift off. And as you can see in our view of the launch pad, vapors are starting to form around the liquid oxygen tank at the base of the rocket, the first stage of the rocket. These vapors are created because of the super cold propellant chilling the air as it passes around the fuselage, the humid Florida air. And we're seeing some of that air condensing out into a wispy fog around the vehicle. SpaceX is testing the limits of the Falcon 9 vehicle with this launch tonight. The first stage booster is making a record-breaking 16th flight. This booster is tail number 1058. Let's take a look at the flight history of booster 1058. It began its career with the launch of the Demo 2 mission in May 2020. This was the first time the Crew Dragon spacecraft had carried astronauts. It flew NASA's Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley to the International Space Station. It flew again in July of that year with the ANASYS Korean military communications satellite. Its third flight was a Starlink mission, and it returned to the International Space Station program with a launch of a cargo Dragon, the CRS-21 resupply mission. It was also the rocket that launched the first transporter rideshare mission. That launch happened in June 2021. And then it returned to Starlink duties, launching a number of Starlink missions. It was then back on transporter duty, launching the third rideshare mission in January 2022. It then launched a number of Starlink missions, the last of which was in December last year. Since then, we believe the rocket has undergone extensive inspections and refurbishment to certify it for this 16th flight. At this point in the countdown, cryogenic helium is being loaded aboard the vehicle. This is used to pressurize the rocket's propellant tanks. We'll also be coming up on the so-called big vent soon. You'll see a large vent from the strongback structure. This vent is part of the process to cool down the plumbing before the start of liquid oxygen load on the second stage of the rocket. And there we see the big vent from the strongback. Once again, this vent is to chill and purge the propellant lines in the strongback structure before the
Stage
start
2 F1 load complete.
of liquid oxygen load. We did also hear the call from SpaceX that the second stage is now fully loaded with kerosene. Liquid oxygen will start loading aboard that stage at T-minus 16 minutes. Now less than 19 minutes to launch. Once again, this Falcon 9 is carrying 22 next generation Starlink satellites. This will be the 5th launch of the so-called version 2 mini Starlink satellites. And we're nearing the end of the purge of those propellant lines and chill down of those propellant lines. And we'll soon be hearing the call that liquid oxygen load on the second
Stage 2
stage.
LOX load has started.
And there we have it, the call from SpaceX that the loading of liquid oxygen aboard the second stage is getting underway. This mission is designated Starlink 6-5. It's 22 Starlink satellites. It's the fifth launch of the Starlink V2 mini design. Each of these satellites weighs about 1,760 pounds. It's the solar panels unfurled to a wingspan of 100 feet. And these craft uses argon hole thrusters for in-orbit maneuvers. They were built at a SpaceX facility in Redmond, Washington, and will be deployed at an altitude of about 200 miles at an inclination of 43 degrees. This is an intermediate design that SpaceX has developed for the Starlink network in between the older generation called the version 1.5 and the next generation full-sized version 2, which SpaceX intends to launch on its fully reusable Starship vehicle. In this view, you can see the difference in the stacks of satellites. On the left side of the screen is the earlier version 1.5, and on the right side are the version 2 mini spacecraft. The version 1.5 satellites, about 50 odd satellites could be launched at a time by the Falcon 9, but these larger satellites mean that the Falcon 9 can only carry about 22 on a mission. The new satellites have 4 times the capacity of the earlier models, and they use an E-band system with upgraded phased array antennas. The argon hole thrusters replace the krypton thrusters that were on the previous spacecraft. They are about 2.6 times heavier and have about 4.4 times the surface area of the previous Starlinks. Here's a view of one of those new argon-fueled thrusters. These thrusters use argon, which is much cheaper than the krypton that was used previously. You can really see the vapors forming now around the first and second stages of the Falcon 9 booster in these humid conditions in Florida. Now less than 10 minutes to launch. Let's take another look at the Falcon 9 vehicle, which is standing on pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Once again, this first stage booster 1058, is flying for the 16th time. That will be a record. The Falcon 9 stands 70 meters tall on the launch pad, and that's about 229 feet, and it has a diameter of 3.6 meters or 12 feet. The first stage is the bottom 2/3 of the rocket. That first stage has flown 15 times to date. This will be its 16th flight. Previously, SpaceX had only certified its Falcon 9 boosters for 15 reuses. The rocket uses Merlin engines, 9 Merlin engines, which burn kerosene and liquid oxygen. They produce about 1.7 million pounds of thrust. The first stage will land on the drone ship, just read the instructions, about 400 miles downrange east of the Bahamas in the Atlantic Ocean. Above the first stage is the interstage. This interstage has the titanium grid fins that are used during that landing process. Those grid fins provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it falls towards the drone ship.
Engines are chilling in for flight.
And we just heard that the engine chill is underway. The interstage also holds the second stage engine nozzle. This is a modified Merlin engine called the MVAC, or Merlin Vacuum Engine, and it produces 200,000 pounds of thrust. It's going to be fired twice today to place the 22 Starlink satellites into their orbit. The second stage of the rocket is the only part that is not reused. And then inside the fairing, we have the 22 Starlink satellites.
Stage 1 RP1 load complete.
And we just heard that kerosene load on the first stage is now complete. The payload fairing will be recovered a little further downrange than the first stage booster.
Tanks are pressing for stomach retract.
And we're hearing that the strongback is being readied for retract. Now less than 5 minutes to launch.
Strongback retract in progress.
And that retract is now underway. You'll start to see the gap between the strongback and the Falcon 9 open up. SpaceX reports that there's less than a 5% chance of a weather violation today, so everything looking good for launch. And you can see in this view from SpaceX that the clamps that held the strongback to the upper stage of the Falcon 9 have opened. And in this view now from our camera, you can see the gap has opened up between the vehicle and the strongback.
Stage 1 LOX load complete.
And the Falcon 9 first stage is now fully loaded with liquid oxygen. The rocket's autonomous destruct system will be armed shortly. Liquid oxygen topping is being terminated soon. Now 2 minutes for launch.
Stage 2 LOX load complete.
And there we have the call that liquid oxygen load is now complete. The Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellants. We're seeing some venting at the launch pad as SpaceX purges the strung back prior to launch. We're approaching the final minute of the countdown. At T-minus 1 minute, the Falcon 9's onboard computers will take control. Stage 1 and Stage 2 will pressurize for flight. Less than a minute to launch.
Falcon is in startup.
And there we have confirmation that the computers have taken control.
Go for launch.
And the launch director has given his final go for launch. 30 seconds to launch. It'll take about 25 seconds for the sound of the Falcon 9's Merlin engines to reach us. 15 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, engine ignition, and liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 with 22 Starlink satellites. This Falcon 9 first stage booster flying for the 16th time. The vehicle has cleared the tower and is pitching downrange, heading southeast. Falcon 9 is now traveling faster than the speed of sound. And the vehicle is passing through the period of maximum dynamic pressure known as max Q. One minute 37 seconds into the flight. SpaceX reports propulsion is nominal. That call indicates the chill down of the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage is underway. We're approaching engine cutoff. The Merlin engines will shut down. They'll be followed by stage separation and ignition of the upper stage. Jettison of the payload fairing comes next. Beautiful views of those 9 Merlin engines. And there we see engine cutoff. Taking a view from SpaceX's onboard cameras. We have confirmation of stage separation and ignition of the second stage. Here's a view from our camera at the Cape, still showing the second stage firing. And in this view from SpaceX on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the grid fins at the top of the first stage on the interstage opening up. We're about to see payload fairing separation. That's on the right side of your screen. And there goes the fairing. You can see the 22 second generation Starlink satellites. The second stage engine glowing red hot. We can see the second stage still visible in the sky at Cape Canaveral. Here you can see the trajectories of the upper stage and the first stage. The first stage, which has successfully completed its climb, its 16th launch, a record-breaking launch. It is now arcing upwards and heading downrange towards the drone ship. Just read the instructions. That drone ship is located east of the Bahamas in the Atlantic Ocean. That's about 400 miles downrange. Meanwhile, the second stage is continuing on its journey to orbit. Now 5 minutes into the flight. SpaceX reporting that the second stage is on a nominal trajectory. You can now see that the altitude of the first stage is falling. It will soon conduct the entry burn to slow its descent so it does not burn up in the atmosphere as it plunges back towards the drone ship. You can see here the trajectory of the first stage and the second stage. Entry burn is coming up shortly. You can see that on the left-hand side of the screen. 3 Merlin engines will be ignited. We've had
Stage 1 FTS is safe.
Had verbal confirmation from SpaceX that the entry burn is underway. We now see that entry burn. Once again, 3 engines ignited for that burn.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
And we have shutdown of the Merlin engines. We'll see that in the video, which comes to us with a little bit of a delay.
Stage 2 FTS is safe.
Second stage continuing to fire, now at an altitude of over 160 kilometers, traveling at almost 17,000 kilometers per hour.
Nominal trajectory.
First stage now less than 20 kilometers in altitude, heading towards the drone ship. Just read the instructions. This is a football field-sized drone ship. It's located 400 miles from Cape Canaveral, east of the Bahamas.
Stage 1 transonic.
And that call indicates the first stage has slowed below the speed of sound, now at an altitude of 8 kilometers. Meanwhile, the upper stage is now accelerated to more than 21,000 kilometers per hour. First stage dropping below 3 kilometers in altitude.
Terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing burn.
And the landing burn is underway.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
The drone ship coming into view, landing leg deploy. And touchdown. The 16th landing for the Falcon 9 booster, tail number 1058. It's now successfully landed on the drone ship. Just read the instructions in the Atlantic Ocean. And it looks like we just had the cutoff of the second stage engine.
Expected loss of signal, Cape.
Nominal parking orbit.
SpaceX reporting that the second stage has reached the planned orbit. And then another view of the booster on the drone ship.
Expected loss of signal, Bermuda.
We're now 10 minutes into flight. The second stage has entered a long coast phase. It's got about 44 minutes to go before a short ignition of that engine to finalize the orbit of the Starlink satellites. That will be followed by deployment of the Starlink satellites 1 hour, 2 minutes after launch. So with the second stage and the 22 Starlink satellites in a parking orbit, we are going to end our live coverage at this point. We will, however, continue to bring you updates in our Launchpad live stream. You should be redirected to that, but we're also posting a link to that in the chat. We really appreciate you joining us for our coverage of this launch. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe, hit the like button, and if you're able to, become a member or leave us a super chat donation. Any support we receive will go towards improving our coverage and expanding the number of streams we can broadcast. Our next launch from Cape Canaveral is the final batch of the original version 1.5 Starlink satellites. The exact launch date for that mission might be a little uncertain because of delays to this launch, but we're expecting that to happen sometime in the coming week. It's probably no earlier than Thursday at this point. So with that, we'll wish you good night from Cape Canaveral. I'd like to thank Adam Bernstein, who operated the cameras tonight for the launch. Continue watching on our Launchpad live stream, and we'll see you next time.